What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Here's the question Moscow does not want anyone asking too loudly, because once people start asking it seriously, the whole image of Putin's strong vertical power begins to look less like a steel wall and more like a very expensive fence held together by money, fear, and just personal deals. What happens to Chechnya if Putin fails in Ukraine, if the war does not bring the result the Kremlin promised, if Moscow becomes too exhausted, distracted, or weak, and if Ramzan Kadyrov decides that his best dying gift is no longer just loyalty to Putin, but loyalty to Chechnya instead? Because Chechnya is not just another Russian region with a governor, budget, and a flag that nobody in Moscow wants to discuss too much. No. Chechnya is the place where Russia already learned through 2 Chechen wars that control can be unbelievably costly. And after all that destruction, the Kremlin did not just magically create love for Moscow. It created just an arrangement where Kadyrov keeps Chechnya quiet, Moscow sends enormous money, billions if not trillions of rubles, and everyone pretends that this is loyalty instead of a very expensive political subscription. And here's the catch. Loyalty bought with money is never real loyalty. Because when the money dries out, when the boss looks weak, when the empire looks tired, and when the local ruler starts thinking about his own legacy, that loyalty can disappear very quickly. Kadyrov may be silent right now because, of his reported health conditions, or maybe because he's just waiting. Maybe because he understands timing better than people think. But silence does not just mean loyalty, and in the end he may still want the final word, because deep inside he is tied to Chechnya, to its people, its pride and its history, not to some abstract Russian state that basically bought his cooperation because it could not afford another explosion in the North Caucasus. So today, let's talk about why Chechnya could become one of Putin's most dangerous internal pressure points, why Kadyrov has already shown that his loyalty has limits, why the Prigozhin mutiny revealed more than the Kremlin wants to admit, and why, if Putin shows even the smallest serious weakness, Chechnya may become the first place where the Russian Federation's hidden cracks become impossible to ignore. So much to unpack as always, let's go to the video right away. Here's what most people of Russia and, pretty much around the world finally start understanding. They see Kadyrov praising Putin. They see the staged loyalty ceremonies, dramatic videos, public declarations, and they assume that this means Kadyrov is deeply loyal to Russia. When in reality, this whole relationship looks much more like a business contract than a true love story. Putin needed Chechnya quiet after the Chechen wars, because another major crisis there would destroy the image he spent decades building, the image of a leader who restored order, crushed separatism, and rebuilt the state after the chaos of the 1990s. And so, instead of creating the real unity, he created a special deal with the Kadyrov system. This deal was, and pretty much still is, very simple. Kadyrov keeps control inside Chechnya, keeps the republic formally inside Russia, provides loyalty when Moscow needs public theater, and in return he gets huge money. He also gets special political protection and a level of internal freedom that almost no other Russian regional leader can ever even imagine. And that tells you everything, because if Kadyrov were just an ordinary governor, Putin could remove him simply, humiliate him, replace him, or move him into some meaningless federal position. But no. Chechnya is different, and Kadyrov is different, because he is not just managing an administrative region. He is sitting on top of a republic with its own history, its own wounds, its own pride, its own networks, and its own memory of fighting Moscow. This is why Putin's system is weaker than it looks, because he did not solve the Chechen question forever. He only postponed it by placing it inside a personal arrangement where money buys silence and personal loyalty buys time. Which, yes, theoretically, as we can see right now, may work for years, maybe even decades, but only as long as the man paying the bill remains strong enough to make the arrangement look safer than any other alternative. Kadyrov understands this perfectly, because he knows that Moscow needs him to keep Chechnya stable. And Moscow knows that if Chechnya becomes unstable, then the entire Russian Federation receives a very dangerous message. If one single region can pressure Putin, guess what? Maybe others can too. That is why the Kremlin tolerates things from Kadyrov that it would never tolerate from almost anyone else. Because an ordinary Russian governor is just a replaceable employee, where Kadyrov is a local power center with his own armed structures, his own family network, his own mythology, and his own political reality. And this is where the whole thing becomes too dangerous for Putin, because every authoritarian system depends on the appearance of total control. And once one powerful regional leader shows that Moscow cannot treat everyone equally, other regions start quietly taking notes, even if publicly they still smile, applaud, and repeat the same patriotic lines for the cameras. So no, Kadyrov's loyalty should not be viewed as eternal, ideological, or emotional. It should be viewed as conditional, expensive, and extremely dependent on Putin still looking strong enough to protect the deal. And the first real warning sign came when Kadyrov basically told Moscow that Chechnya had already given more than enough to the war. It happened almost in the very beginning. This was the first warning sign that Putin seemingly ignored. Guys, just also, by the way, one quick word about the Victory Parade livestream that we all watched last Friday. First of all, thank you all so much for joining. I never expected that many of you, and we had amazing time as always. Thank you all for keeping this annual Russian Youth tradition alive. But I do have some bad news as well. As expected, the video got copyright warning, some random Egyptian channel issued it, and YouTube just accepted it without verifying absolutely anything. It's so easy to just do these copyright strikes literally by anyone, and then it's just up to creator, like up to me to figure out the rest. As of right now, all the video revenue is being held until further notice, and there is no guarantee that the verdict will be in our favor, even though there is literally my face and my voice there, and they copyrighted it. So anyways, outrageous to say the least. That is why in order for such things to have a smaller impact on our channel performance, we have our own Patreon page and donations. This allows us to rely less on YouTube during such situations, so guys, if you want to help us, please consider becoming a Patreon member, literally the best way to support our work. In return, you will get an additional chapter at the end of each episode and early access to these, our videos. All the links are down below. Thanks so much. Now let's continue. Here is where it all went downhill for Putin-Kadyrov relationship. After several months of the full-scale war, Kadyrov said that Chechnya had contributed more than enough Chechen fighters, almost literally his quote, and would reduce the number moving forward. And this one phrase revealed more about Russia's real internal power structure than 1,000 Kremlin speeches about unity. I mean, just imagine any other Russian regional governor once again saying something like that. It's gonna be that's it for him. Open window or Russian tea. Imagine a governor from even a poor Russian region standing up and saying, "Moscow, our people have given enough. We are going to reduce our contribution now. That's it." And then imagine how fast that person would just disappear, either physically or at least from political map. Because in Putin's Russia, ordinary governors do not negotiate with the Kremlin during wartime, if ever. They obey, smile, and pretend everything is going according to somehow Putin's plan. But Kadyrov said it, and Putin could not really do absolutely anything dramatic about it, because Putin needs Kadyrov in a way he does not need most other regional officials. That moment matters because it showed that Chechnya is not treated like a normal part of the Russian Federation, no matter how loudly Moscow pretends otherwise. Chechnya is treated like a special political zone where the rules are different, the leverage is different, and the relationship with the Kremlin is built on not on a normal administration. It is built on bargaining. So, why does Putin then even accept this kind of humiliation? Because he needs stability once again in Chechnya, after Russia devastated the republic during both Chechen wars, and because he needs to show the rest of Russia's regions, which is even more important potentially, that he still controls everything and everyone, even if behind closed doors the situation is much more complicated. If Chechnya eventually separates or even seriously attempts to at least separate, it would not only be a Chechen problem for Moscow, it would signal to other regions that the Kremlin can be pressured, Putin can be pressured, and the center has limits, and that if you find the right moment, the right weak spots at the right moment, even Putin can be forced into defensive position. That is precisely why Chechnya is so important, because the danger is not only one republic trying to walk away, the danger is the example it will set for everyone else. Kadyrov knows this, Moscow knows this, and honestly many regional elites probably know this as well, even though they just never say it obviously in public. because Russia's so-called federation is full of places where local identity, local resentment, and local economic frustration are all buried under the layers of fear, propaganda, and budget dependency. That is why this earlier Kadyrov's statement of more than enough was not just about fighters or wartime participation. It was a public reminder that Chechnya's loyalty has a price, a limit, and a separate political logic from the rest of Russia. And if that was the first warning sign, the second warning came during the Prigozhin's mutiny that pretty literally was the most important moment of Russia's modern history, when Chechen loyalty somehow got stuck in a traffic at the most convenient moment imaginable. Let's talk about it next. This is where things get almost absurd, because when Yevgeny Prigozhin started moving towards Moscow and the Russian state suddenly looked exposed, confused, and embarrassingly fragile, Chechen forces were reportedly supposed to help stop him, but then, almost like the universe itself was just writing dark political comedy script, they, well, as you all know, conveniently got stuck in a traffic. I mean, of course, yeah, traffic does happen, logistics are complicated, roads can be blocked, convoys can move slowly, and nobody needs to pretend that every delay is some just secret master plan. But I mean, come on, like, the timing was so perfect that even people inside the Kremlin probably had to stare at the wall for a moment and ask whether this was really the official explanation or just an excuse. Because when Putin faced one of the most humiliating internal crises of his rule, when Prigozhin was moving towards Moscow and everyone was watching to see whether the Russian state could even protect itself from its own former insider, the people who usually present themselves as the most loyal defenders of the system, Chechens, they completely did not arrive in time, if they did not arrive at all, for the hardest part. And then, after things were already settled, after the mutiny had already been diffused, Lukashenko called Prigozhin, after the immediate danger basically passed, Chechens arrived and said, "Look, boss, we are here. What do you want us to do? Ready to do everything for Russia, for you." Except that, well, there was nothing else left to do. And that is exactly the point, because the real loyalty is not tested when the cameras are ready, when the medals are polished, when the danger is gone, and when the only thing left to perform is just to show loyalty for television. No, real loyalty is tested when the outcome is uncertain, when the situation is dangerous, and when choosing the wrong side can cost you absolutely everything. During Prigozhin's move towards Moscow, Kadyrov's camp appeared to do what the smart regional power brokers often do in the moments of elite conflict. They just waited, watched, calculated, and avoided jumping too early into the situation where nobody knew exactly who will win. That's pretty much what happened. And honestly, from Kadyrov's perspective, that makes perfect sense. Because why would he even risk his own forces, his own political capital, and his own future before he knows whether Putin is still even fully in control? That moment revealed something extremely important. Kadyrov's first instinct is not necessarily to protect Putin at all costs, but protect himself, protect Chechnya, family network, and the political structure he built. This is not emotional loyalty. This is just simple survival politics. And survival politics can change direction extremely quickly when the center begins to weaken. If Putin looks strong, Kadyrov praises him. If Putin looks useful, Kadyrov supports him. And if Putin keeps money flowing, Kadyrov just stays inside the arrangement quietly. But if Putin begins to look like a declining ruler surrounded by too many crises at the same time, then Kadyrov has every single reason to start thinking about what comes next. And the next chapter may not be just being written in Moscow. It may be very well written in Grozny, the capital of Chechnya. Because Kadyrov is not just a Kremlin-appointed manager. He is a proud man ruling a proud people, and that means that the question of legacy matters more than many outsiders understand. Let's talk about it next. Here is what most people do not think about. Kadyrov may have all the money, all the power, all the titles, all the Kremlin protection, and all the public loyalty performances in the world, but at some point every ruler starts thinking about how he will be remembered. And for Kadyrov, that question is incredibly complicated. Does he want to be remembered as the man who just took Moscow's money, bowed his head, and kept Chechnya quiet? You tell me. Or does he want to be remembered at least by part of his own people as the man who waited for the right moment and that right at least or maybe even succeeded to return Chechnya to its former path? That is the real legacy question, because Kadyrov's entire public identity is built on strength, pride, family, religion, Chechen identity, and personal authority, not on being a normal Russian bureaucrat who quietly retires after serving the federal center. He is not some grey official from a provincial administration who dreams of a safe pension and a quiet office. No, he is a local ruler with historical ambitions, and people like that do not always want their final line in history to be, he just kept the republic calm for Moscow while the money was good. And this becomes even more important because Kadyrov has reportedly faced serious health issues, as we all know. And while we should not obviously treat rumors as proven facts, the political logic is extremely obvious. When a powerful man starts thinking his time may be limited, he may also start thinking less about maintenance and more about legacy. If Kadyrov believes he does not have much to lose, then a weakened Putin could become the excuse that just he needs. Not necessarily because he suddenly becomes a romantic independence hero overnight, but because political survival, family succession, and historical reputation may all point in the same direction if Moscow starts losing its grip. And if Kadyrov does not make the move himself, the story does not need to just end here, because he has sons, including Adam, who are clearly being raised inside the political systems their father built. And they may one day inherit not only power, but also the decision of whether to keep the Kremlin arrangement alive or transform the family brand into something completely more openly Chechen and extremely nationalist. That is the part Moscow should fear, because even if Kadyrov Sr. remains silent, even if his health limits him, and even if he never personally declares anything dramatic, the system he built does not disappear overnight. Because the family remains, networks remain, armed structures remain, the clans remain, and the idea of Chechen independence remains strong in people's heads. And if the Kadyrov family fails to deliver what part of Chechen society may eventually demand, then there are always other clans, other tribes, other networks, and other ambitious figures who would be more than happy, more than welcome to inherit all this moment, take the power, and present themselves as the ones who return Chechnya's former glory. That is why this issue is bigger than just one simple man. Kadyrov matters, obviously, because he controls the current arrangement, but the deeper issue is that Chechnya's relationship with Moscow was never truly normalized. It was suppressed, financed, personalized, and frozen. And frozen conflicts have a very unpleasant habit of melting when the political climate changes. And if Putin becomes weaker, if the war becomes more unsuccessful, if Moscow becomes busy with Ukraine, sanctions, elite conflicts, economic pressure, battlefield setbacks, or any single other international crisis imaginable, then Chechnya may not just need a perfect opportunity. It may only need a moment when the Kremlin cannot respond with its usual force. And that is when the real nightmare begins for Moscow, because Chechnya would not only be challenging Putin, it would be showing everyone else that Putin can and should be challenged. Now here is the most important part. The Kremlin's biggest fear is not only that Chechnya separates, but that Chechnya proves separation itself is possible. Because an empire can survive many problems as long as everyone believes that the center always wins. But the moment one serious region finds the right pressure point and gets away with challenging the center, the whole psychological structure begins to shake. Putin's system depends on perception more than anything else. It depends on the idea that Moscow is always stronger, always richer, always able to punish, always able to replace leaders, always able to control television, courts, police, budgets, borders, everything and everyone. But if Putin fails in Ukraine, if he cannot achieve his goals, if he appears weak, if the war drains too much money, and if regional elites start seeing that Moscow's threats are not as terrifying as they seemed before, then the Federation starts looking extremely different, because loyalty becomes negotiable. Governors begin calculating, local elites begin protecting themselves, and national republics begin remembering that Moscow is not some sort of untouchable force of nature, but just a simply government with very limited resources, limited attention, and limited ability to manage every crisis at the same time. That is why Chechnya is in such a dangerous pressure point, because it already has the history, the identity, the leadership structure, and a special status that make it different from a regular Russian region. It is not hard to imagine how a separation argument could be framed if Putin looks weak enough. Moscow dragged the country to disastrous war, Moscow wasted resources, Moscow failed to protect Russia's future, Moscow can no longer guarantee stability, and that is why Chechnya must now think about its own destiny. Well, I mean, guys, it almost writes itself. That message would terrify the Kremlin because it could spread, not everywhere, not instantly, not all at once, and not automatically, but just enough to create panic inside a system that survives by making people believe that there is no alternative. And remember, Putin's entire post-1990s mythology is based on the idea that he stopped Russia from falling apart. He restored the state and separatism and brought order after chaos. So, if Chechnya challenges that myth, then it does not just create a regional crisis, it attacks the foundation of Putin's image. That is why the Kremlin continues paying, tolerating, flattering and negotiating with Kadyrov, because the alternative is extremely too dangerous. But the problem is that this solution also creates danger. If Putin pressures Kadyrov too much, he risks destabilizing Chechnya. But if he keeps empowering Kadyrov, he strengthens a regional leader who may one day use that power against Moscow itself. That is the trap. Putin bought stability, but he also created a powerful local actor whose loyalty depends on Putin remaining useful to him. And once Putin stops being useful, the deal can change. Money dries out, loyalty is over. That sentence sounds brutally simple, but it explains the whole arrangement better than any Kremlin speech ever would. Because Moscow has spent years confusing purchased obedience with real unity, while ignoring the fact that people who stay for money may leave when the price changes. And that is why the war in Ukraine matters so much for Chechnya. Because the war is not only a foreign policy event, it is a stress test of the Russian state. And if the promised victory never comes, if internal conflicts become more visible, if economic strain becomes harder to hide, and if the elite's uncertainty suddenly grows, then regional leaders will not simply sit there just doing nothing like furniture, waiting for Moscow to decide their own future. No, they will watch, they will calculate, they will plan, they will protect themselves first of all. And some of them may begin imagining a life after Putin long before they are ready to say it out loud. And if Chechnya moves first, even unsuccessfully, it would still send a message that the Russian Federation is not as stable as it pretends. That is why Moscow watches Kadyrov carefully, even when it smiles at him publicly. Because behind all the public loyalty, everyone understands the very same thing. Kadyrov has his own power, his own family, his own republic, his own legacy problem, and his own reasons to wait for Putin's weakness and then to act. Guys, if anything of this makes sense, please make sure to subscribe to our channel, like this video. Don't forget about the additional chapter that begins right now. I mean, as long as you're watching on Patreon, the link is down below. Thanks much. See you on Friday.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe